Hello everybody, if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that last year I picked up my first ever Aston Martin, a first generation DB9, formerly the DB9 of Ben from Dad Cars. But that was a car I bought because I'd always wanted an Aston and was worried I was never going to pull the trigger. I treated it like an extended test drive, and over the period I had it, made a few improvements, changed a few things, and of course put quite a few miles on the car. I am now very happy to say that it has been sold, and by the time this video goes out, will already be on its way to its new owner. Which leaves me with that most exciting of quandaries. What do I get to replace it? Now the truth is, I have yet to decide what car I'm actually going to get next, and I have cast the net far and wide, but another Aston is definitely on that list of potentials, and so to narrow it down a little bit further, today I've come over to Nicholas Me to do a little bit of window shopping, and I thought you might like to join me. So today, it's another episode of First World Problems. Now, one of the reasons I'm really keen to continue being an Aston Martin owner is that means that you're part of an incredible brand with an amazing heritage. They've been in business for over 100 years. And though in that time, compared to other companies, they haven't actually made that many cars, the ones they have, more often than not, have become icons. And so when you say Aston Martin to anybody, they'll almost certainly conjure up an image of something in their head, something that they've likely coveted for a very long time. Be it James Bond in his DB5, or James Bond in his Aston Martin Vanquish, or maybe that bloke he saw getting out of a club one day in London 30 years ago. Aston Martins are very special cars. Now, for many people, I would wager that their dream Aston Martin looks a little bit like one of these. To my far right, we have the iconic DB5, then here to my left, a DB4, of which I have driven a modified example and rather enjoyed it. Then here we have the incredible DB4 GT, now worth about £2.5 million. And though these are all well beyond my budget, that actually in some way is irrelevant, because they are not the Astons of my dreams. Had my numbers come up last night and I found myself this morning an unexpected millionaire, this is the car I'd be after, a 1979 V8 Vantage. In its day, the top of the line and one of the most powerful cars in the world. This particular example looks absolutely stunning and is currently up for sale. It has just 2 owners to its name and 49,000 miles, having been in its current ownership since 1985. It is absolutely glorious, but still going to be at least £250,000, and it's a genuine classic. One day I will have something like this, but today is not that day. Instead, what I need is something a little newer, a little more usable, daily drivable, economical, and practical. Not all that long ago, I took out this very car, a V12 Vanquish S, a member of the first generation Vanquish family and arguably the car that dragged Aston Martin kicking and screaming into the 21st century, with, I would say, quite some success. But even this now today is probably best viewed as more of a classic rather than something you can simply hop into and drive. These are not perfect cars. They do have their fair share of issues, and though they are full of character and wonderful to drive, first off, I do fear it would be a little bit too similar to my Ferrari 550, and it's another car that I think just isn't quite me. I really, really like it, but I don't love it. As it happens, my good friend Ben, who is here today and will feature in the video later, does. And I suspect of all the cars in here, were he to take one home, it could be this one. But let's not beat about the bush any further. Let me show you the trio of cars that I've asked Nicholas Me to pull out so that I can show you, because they are 3 that I'm genuinely considering. In no particular order, we have a 2012 model year V12 Vantage, a 2011 model year DBS, and a rather rare, last of the line 2018 Vanquish S Ultimate Edition. 3 superb V12 powered Aston Martins, each with a different character. But what are the pros and cons of each for me? I'm going to start with this, the DBS, because in truth, this really is the one that I think I lust after the most. This is a car that I think just about everybody fell in love with when they first saw it in Casino Royale nearly 20 years ago. Yeah, 2006 that car. And for many people, that was the first time they saw a DBS, as by that time, they weren't actually in production. They came out shortly after, and unfortunately, came out exactly when the recession hit, meaning these are still a relatively rare thing. They commanded a significant premium over the DB9, and one that many people at the time felt just wasn't worth it. But here and now, I've got to say, even as technically at this exact point in time, still a DB9 owner, this feels like a very different car. Yeah, sure, open the door and the interior, a few bits of trim aside, is identical, but from outside, nearly every panel has been changed. In fact, I think the only ones that aren't are the doors and the roof. Maybe these. This is different. This is different. The boot lid is different. The rear bumper is different. The wheels are different. Many of these pieces now made in carbon fiber. You have standard fit carbon ceramic brakes, options of a few different wheels. These actually are the sort of lesser spotted ones, but I think actually suit the car really nicely. This example in particular, I also really like, being in a stunning blue, I believe called Midnight. And that's quite a rare thing because of all the modern day Aston Martins, the DBS has one of the highest silver grey ratios. Something like 72% of them are silver, grey or black. And that is a shame. There are a few things I would really like for my next Aston Martin, and one of the big ones is that I don't really want it to be silver or grey. I would also really like the posh sound system, the B&O pop-up tweeter jobby, which this has. I'd also like the carbon fiber buckets, which you do see in Casino Royale and do feature in a few DBS, but sadly not this one or indeed many others. Downsides for this car, well, as it stands, this engine produces 510 horsepower, so not really all that much more than my current one does. In fact, at the heart, the engine is effectively the same. The gearbox options, again, are identical. You could have the car either with a 6-speed manual, which many consider the desirable option, or the same Touchtronic 2 as I've got in the DB9. And this is something I find myself in an eternal quandary about, because though you'd think, of course, as a petrol head, the obvious option is to get the manual, actually, I've driven a lot of Aston Martin V12 manuals. I don't get on with them all that well. The clutch is horrid, the gear lever's in the wrong place, it blocks half the functions on the dash that you do need to get to, and for a car like this, actually, to be able to just stick it in auto and get on with it, actually, I kind of appreciate that. So I'd be happy to take advantage of the fact people will pay less for an auto and get what is fundamentally a better car at a lower price. The issue is, there simply isn't a DBS out there that I've looked at and gone, that's the one. So I'd really have to spend a fair bit of money turning it into the perfect car for me. And on the one hand, that'd be a great build series. That's perfect YouTube content. On the other, well, other content creators have already done a lot of stuff with a DBS. There's one build series going on at the moment. Mr. JWW is building, to be honest, what looks like a fantastic version of a DBS. And I do have to have a little bit of business awareness of a purchase of this scale, because I need to be able to make some money to justify what it is that I'm going to be spending. And so that makes this a tricky proposition, as does the fact, like my DB9, it's got back seats that are functionally useless to me and a boot that is just a little bit too small. So though I still really, really desperately want one of these, and at about £60,000 starting price up to just over 100, they are definitely within budget. I think for now, maybe this should stay on the dream list. And now the car that I think for petrol heads might actually be even more desirable than the DBS, and for me is a bit of a bargain, the V12 Vantage. Introduced in 2009, this is of course another version of the amazing Vantage, the baby Aston, that appeared in 2005. And here Aston followed that time-honoured recipe of simply sticking your biggest engine in your smallest car. And what a combo you have here. It's the exact same 510 horsepower, 6-litre, naturally aspirated V12 you got in the DBS in a car considerably smaller, therefore lighter, and available exclusively with a 6-speed manual gearbox. Yes, effectively the same manual gearbox as in the DBS, so the same complaints still apply. But on paper, this is a staggering car. And the fact you can pick one up now for under £60,000 is incredible. This is a later 2012 example and is up for just over £75,000, but is in stunning condition and I think has got to be one of the most tempting cars in here. And that's saying a lot. The upsides of this car also are the fact you've got, yes, all that performance in a smaller package, which means it is going to feel quite different to drive to the DB9. You have a shorter wheelbase. It's a more sportily set up car. It has more of an idea of what it wants to be than certainly my DB9 did when I got it. You also have, and this is a real selling point for the Vantage, just the 2 seats. I don't need little ones in the back, but instead you've got a much bigger boot. And that I really do like. This also happens to be in its own way a spectacular looking car, although when you do compare this and the DBS, you notice some of the many ways Aston made sure the DBS was still the top of the tree. So for example, that has carbon fibre wing mirror supports. These are metal. That also has beautiful LEDs integrated into this little side stroke, whereas this still has the early DB9 style horrible wart on the side. I've also never liked the wheels they put on the original V12 Vantage, and I've driven one of these. Like the DBS, it disappointed. They're just too firm. I just did not get on with this car when I drove it. It was easily one of the biggest disappointments I ever experienced. Not helped by the fact that on the same day, I drove a Ferrari 599, which at the time could have been had for similar money and today is still not that much more expensive. And the fact is, the Ferrari proved why it was so much more an expensive car when new and also used. However, the V12 Vantage is not a car I am considering. Instead, that is its successor, the V12 Vantage S, which brings with it a few differences, including the fact that they now have the later version of the engine, making 565 horsepower, but also controversially, from 2013 onwards, when the model was introduced, it came just with a 7-speed automated manual, branded Sport Shift 3. Later, they reintroduced the manual gearbox, now as a 7-speeder, but those cars command a significant premium. They're all well over £100,000, usually between 120 and 150. But the S, it's nicer inside, it's nicer outside, it drives much better, has adaptive dampers that really do work, better steering, and the whole thing just makes sense. And if you are willing to put up with that Sport Shift gearbox, you can get one for about the same price as one of these. 70 to 80,000 pounds will get you into one. I just need to work out whether that gearbox is going to be too much of a compromise, but that is a real temptation. And now our wild card. These other two cars in here, they're lovely. They're very nice. They're good representative examples of the sort of thing that I might be looking at, but neither is perfect. I love the fact this is a nice color, but it doesn't have the bucket seats. It does have the DBS. However, I've already talked about why the DBS is probably the wrong purchase for me. Nicholas Me do have a V12 Vantage S in stock, but unfortunately this morning it was not available. Hence we've been looking at the original V12. But this Vanquish, I came in to film the Vanquish 1, the one over there that I introduced the video next to, and I saw this and I just stopped and went, wow. What makes this so remarkable? Well, a few things. First off, it is a Vanquish S, and I am constantly on the fence as to whether I prefer the looks of the early or the late cars. Now, for those who don't know, when the Vanquish was introduced in 2013, effectively as the successor to this, the DBS, they did make some upgrades, including the engine, now to 565 horsepower, to the interior, where I would argue the biggest changes have been made, and of course also to the exterior, which is frankly drop-dead gorgeous in all of its iterations. However, one of the carryovers from the DBS was the 6-speed Touchtronic 2 ZF automatic gearbox, which for the Vanquish was the one and only you could have. This car was never produced with a manual. But soon into its life, around 2014, they upgraded it and replaced it with the 8-speed ZF. And this improved things quite a bit. The shift times were improved and the 0 to 60 time went down and top speed up. The car now being capable of over 200 miles an hour. And though for some time a Vanquish was a fairly good buy, the fact was the 8-speed commanded more, and the later Vanquish S, now with 595 horsepower, commanded even more again. But things are a-changing, and these I think have now hit their nadir, with the early examples, if you're willing to buy private, now available for under 60,000 quid. An 8-speed is still going to command a little bit more, over £80,000, and an S, with its extra aero and bits, about £100,000. However, the simple fact was, I was never convinced by the looks of the S. Yes, it's more power, a little bit more aerodynamically sophisticated, but the fact is, I don't really care about that sort of stuff. And I'm constantly worried that this carbon splitter at the front is going to get smashed into the ground at some point. I was never quite sure about the exhausts on the back with the S either. They're a little showier and shoutier than the regular Vanquish. In fact, on all of them, I've never really been that sure of the rear wing. If you asked me, I'd say the back of this is far, far prettier. However, this exact car, when I came in and saw it, I was staggered. First off by the colour, and I know I said I don't want another silver or grey Aston Martin, but I would break my own rules for this. It is an Ultimate Edition car, one of the last 175 produced, and I think one of about 121 coupes and I think about 50-odd right-hand drive cars. It in fact featured very recently on PistonHead's Spotted feature. For once, I apparently am copying them. It's got a lot of nice details. The paintwork, by the way, is called Xenon Grey, and in photos, you just don't appreciate how good it looks. But it's got like a granite kind of appearance to it. It's spectacular. There is so much metallic, you're amazed you can even see the paintwork beyond it. Inside, then yes, it is predominantly black, but now with these nice chestnut accents, beautiful stitching that are nice, elegant, but not over the top like some Vanquish are. It's also got the B&O pop-up stereo, which many Vanquish do, and though it has the 2+2 seating, which is ultimately useless for me, and I'm not fond of the seats in this, they're just not supportive enough, it does have a bigger boot. It is also filled with just spectacular details. These side blades, the wing mirrors, everything on this car makes it feel like Aston Martin went to town. And this is the last of the VH era of cars. It was replaced essentially by the new DBS, but in the interim you had the DB11, and the fact was, these cars for a lot of people didn't make much sense because the DB11 was, in the real world, quicker, newer and all that. But today, this to me is just amazing. And if somebody phoned me and said, James, we're really sorry, an elephant has fallen on your F12, I'd be thinking about this precise car. Why am I not? Well, it's a lower mileage example, sub 10,000, and it's currently commanding a price of about £160,000. I'm not saying that's bad value, but the fact is, it's a late, limited edition, low mileage car. If I put miles on it, I am going to lose a fair bit of money. And mechanically, this is effectively the same as a regular Vanquish S that you could have for a lot less, more like £110,000. Yeah. Lot to think about. At this point in time, I'd love you to hop into the comment section and tell me which you would have, given either my or your circumstances. But before the video finishes, I'd like to hand you over to my friend Ben, who's going to tell you what in here he really likes. And then I'm going to hand you over to Neil, the marketing guy here at Nicholas Me, who, though I'm sure slightly biased, is also incredibly knowledgeable. And I've asked him to give me his pick of the moment for those on the hunt for what might be their first Aston Martin.
So yeah, look, you mentioned it earlier on, the car that I cannot help but look at all the time at the moment is the Vanquish 1. Because the early Vanquish 1s, the prices that you see them come up for in the classifieds is crazy. But
Have you sat in one?
Huh?
Have you sat in one?
I've never sat in one, no. Yeah, it'd be okay with it. Let me sit in one, yeah. Okay. Because it's just such... This was the first poster Aston for me. This is, as a child, what got me into the brand. Oh. Okay, yeah, so look, the big criticism is obviously inside, isn't it? Because if you sit in a DB9, a V8 Vantage, it's one of the best interiors, I believe, of our generation. But this one, is this one a bit special, James? Because has this got a little bit more leather in here? Because
no, the leather's standard. The gearbox is obviously...
Yeah, you don't see that. It's normally the robotised manual, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's not as bad as I was expecting. It's not as bad as I was expecting. And the exciting thing about this as well is obviously I'm always thinking about rear seats, is that there is no transmission tunnel in the back as well. So that opens things up. But it's the fear of something going wrong with a Vanquish 1, isn't it? Because a DB9 made in the numbers that it was, that is something that I proved that you can actually daily. But could you daily one of these? I don't know, I don't think you could. I'd feel sort of worried that something's going to go pop, it's going to be like a 10 grand part that you just can't get hold of or something, I don't know. But, God, look, externally, this is the finest of wines. You know, I used to even think that the rear of these cars, you know, the rear lights, I didn't like them, but I'm even starting to like them now as well. But if you sit one of these next to a DB9, it makes the DB9 look really understated, doesn't it? It's so muscular. The shoulders, you know, the muscular angles from the front end, and the perfect size front grille. You sit this next to even a DBS, and it makes a DBS front grille, in my opinion, look too small. This is a perfect size. And when you look at the earlier DB cars as well, obviously they've got quite big front grilles, you know? So yeah, look, I can't obsess about these, but I think I need some more, once my channel grows to a certain size where I can kind of at least make a video about if I get a horrible 10 grand bill for my Vanquish 1. The other thing that I really quickly want to talk about is DB9.2. Now this is a DB9.2 GT Bond Edition, which is obviously just for collections. No one drives a Bond Edition car, I don't think. But the shout out for the DB9.2 is I think it's the finest example at the time of a facelift. Because if you look at the Gran Turismo or the Jaguar XKs, as throughout their life in the noughties, into the 10s, the facelifts aren't actually that significant, whereas the DB9.1 to the DB9.2, this is a stunning modern looking car. So I think of its sort of its competitors at the time, I think that Aston nailed it with the big facelift on their 2+2 Grand Tourer of the time. Yeah, the only other thing that I wanted to sort of like point out as well is obviously I'm always thinking about rear practicality, rear seats. And it is a real shame when you look at all of these classic Aston Martins, just how much more space there is in the back. Obviously I spent some time with Guy's V8, which James very kindly put me in touch with, and that was just a dream come true for me. But the rear space in all the older ones, so much better. It's a shame that from DB7 onwards, they kind of went with the 2+2, more sort of 911 sort of size rear seats. It's a big shame, obviously, for me and anybody who's looking to use them as cars with their children.
Right, so my name's Neil. I'm one of the directors here at Nicholas Me & Company. Alongside Nick, I spend most of my time trying to sell these cars, in addition to running the business generally. This is my 16th year with the company, and prior to that I was working at Aston Martin as commercial manager of their racing team, racing the DBR9s, etc, etc. So probably about 20 years with the marque. Coming back after New Year, I spent a few hours on Auto Trader and Piston Heads looking around at the marketplace, just familiarising myself with pricing on various models, and I've got to say there are some incredible bargains to be had at the moment. There has been some softening of prices over the last 12 months as sentiment was knocked by
the interest rate rises last year and all the crazy things happening in the world at the moment, and it has caused people to think long and hard about whether they should be buying an Aston Martin. Dealers have reacted, and in some cases prices have softened a little bit. And if you look at the marketplace today, I think there are some cracking bargains to be had. I'm looking at Rapides and Rapide S's. Wow, what a lot of car for the money. I'm looking at the prices of V12 Vantages and think that's a car that's never going to be repeated, and you go and buy a cracking one of those for £70,000, you're not going to be disappointed. DB9's another great value model on the marketplace at the moment, and the Vanquish, second generation Vanquish, also looking very appealing, as are the first generation Vanquishes. They have come back from their highs of 2015, 2016. So it's a good time to be a buyer. Unsurprisingly, it's a question I do get asked a lot actually, which one would you have, or which is your favourite model? I have a big thing for the older cars. The 1960s Aston Martins are beautiful and give you a level of engagement that you don't get with modern cars. You really have to think about those cars and drive those cars. So I'd love a DB4, in particular the Series 2 is one that I really like. More modern cars, V12 Vantage for me, I really like. Before filming the video, I was just talking to James, and if my auntie died and left me some money in her will, and I had a little bit more money than we're talking about in this video, I'd be buying a 1990s V8. I think they look incredible value today. The V550s, the V600s, or even the little brother, the V8 Coupe. That is a great value tip today. In the more modern cars, the Gaydon era cars, I think I would be looking at a 2013 onwards DB9. That was a significant year. The cars were upgraded quite significantly. So get yourself in a 14 or 15 plate DB9 before they introduced the DB9 GT. I was looking at the website, you can get a cracking car for £50,000. That's going to look after you very well in years to come.
Well, there we go. A big thanks once again to Nicholas Me for allowing us to film, to both Ben and Anil for getting on camera, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.